really appreciate you being here, Spencer. It's been a lot of fun talking to you kind of over Messenger and since our last discussion, I've gotten to read more of your stuff and I'm constantly impressed with the stuff that you've not only the content, the things that you've chosen to talk about, the actual content itself, but your writing style as well is incredibly accessible. So for a layman like myself, it's really fun and helpful, I think, in getting into some of these what some might consider to be pretty deep topics. Today, we're going to discuss your recent paper and what you presented on last year at the Interpreter Foundation. Now, this this paper is actually, as for as in depth as it is, it's not super long, so it's not incredibly intimidating. Um, but um, what I would like to say is, coming off of the Come Follow Me this past week, going through sections 129 through 132, I found your paper and the article, by the way, on Know Why by Scripture Central, is incredibly helpful for understanding the context behind DNC 129. And so I'm hoping, Spencer, if you'll indulge me, if we'll start how your paper starts, and we'll kind of run through um, the different aspects of the content of your paper in the way that you write about it. And so I will include the
Uh,
link to the presentation that you gave for the Interpreter Foundation. Um,
yeah,
and I will include the link for the Know Why article recently published earlier this month by Scripture Central.
yeah, and that's awesome. And this paper will be published soon. We'll put it out there. The conference proceedings, if you go to Interpreter's website in their books, you'll see it's scheduled for fall 2025. So sometime within the next 1 or 2 months, they should be publishing it. Yeah, I did send you the proof though.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
you guys at home won't be getting that. You'll get
yeah,
the final version when it's finally uploaded officially.
I like you so much that I gave you the sneak peek. But um yeah, this paper was really fun to get into. Um and yeah, just I guess starting where I started in this paper. Uh this starts with uh April 16th, 1843. The prophet Joseph Smith addressed the assembly of the saints at the temple of the Lord upon the subject of the death, burial, and resurrection of the saints. At this time, Joseph had been asked to give a lot of sermons for funerals, and he had just learned that one of the elders who had been serving in England had died. And so that he kind of did a one sermon for all these funerals, just so many birds with one stone. But it's in this sermon that uh, he he declares, God hath shown unto me a vision of the resurrection of the dead. I saw the graves open, and the saints, as they arose, took each other by the hand, even before they got up or while getting up. Great joy and glory rested upon them. And he would go on to say, so plain was the vision, I actually saw men before they had ascended from the tomb, as though they were getting up slowly. They took each other by the hand, and it was my father and my son, my mother and my daughter, my brother and my sister. And when the voice calls, suppose I am laid by the side of my father, what would be the first joy of my heart? Where is my father, my mother, my sister? They are by my side. I embrace them, and they me. So for Joseph Smith, uh, uh, in this grand vision he saw, the resurrection of the dead is very closely connected to a sacred handclasp. And he would even go on to say on another occasion, the place where a man is buried has been sacred to me in direct connection with the saint's ability to take each other by the hand and perhaps even take Jesus Christ by the hand as they're resurrected. And again, in on June 11th, 1843, Joseph would again speak on this and say that in the resurrection, some are raised to be angels, others are raised to become gods. These things are revealed in the most holy place in a temple prepared for that purpose. So, whatever happens in the resurrection, Joseph is clearly connecting this to the ordinances of the Holy Temple. And hmm, uh, all of this connects with, what he had taught as early as 1839. In 1839, on June 27th, Joseph Smith met with many of the apostles, and Wilfred Woodruff wrote about this in his journal, and he said that Joseph taught that a hand clasp was one of the vast number of keys of the kingdom of God, which could be used in order to detect the devil when he transforms himself nigh unto an angel of light. And Joseph would repeat these instructions repeatedly, the most famous of which, as you mentioned, is canonized in section 129 of the Doctrine and Covenants, that there are three grand keys, by which we can detect if an angel or is a true messenger, or Satan trying to deceive those he appears to.
Yeah.
And
And just kind of real quick, because this is so fresh and we just read through section 129 of the Doctrine and Covenants as recently as last week for our Come Follow Me program, this is going to be fresh in a lot of people's minds. And I wonder how many Latter-day Saints will have connected this section with a temple context. Because as it reads, there's nothing overtly explicit about the temple. Um, and so this is kind of one of those topics that if you don't really know what you're looking at, you just might miss it.
Mhm.
And as you already mentioned, one of the big, and this is a very short section, it's only 9 verses. But you already mentioned towards the end of the section here, we have these keys, these grand keys to know the administration of angels, whether they're from God or from a Satan or a deceptive um, spirit. And so we have these kind of the keys that we're going to talk about here. But if you wouldn't mind indulging me for a moment, I do kind of want to read section 129
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
briefly to give some context for the listeners at home who don't have it immediately available to pull up in front of them. So this is section 129 of the Doctrine and Covenants. It's only 9 verses long. It's recorded as being instruction from Joseph Smith at Nauvoo, February 9th, 1843. And as far as I understand it, this actual section, the content of the section, is actually taken from the journal of William Clayton.
Yes.
Um, and there are several other sections from the Doctrine and Covenants that were canonized as part of the Doctrine and Covenants that were also similarly taken from journal entries of William Clayton and others who served as scribes and so forth for Joseph at the time. Um, so I want to read through these 9 verses quickly. I won't try to stay on it too long, but just for context here, what we're talking about and why the quotes that you have been quoting and that we're talking about are going to provide some further context for this.
Yeah.
So, starting verse 1, it says, there are two kinds of beings in heaven, namely angels, who are resurrected personages having bodies of flesh and bone. For instance, Jesus said, handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones as ye see me have. Secondly, the spirits of just men made perfect, they who are not resurrected, but inherit the same glory. And I think we would infer that at some point they will be resurrected.
Hmm.
Um, Verse 4 says, when a messenger comes saying he has a message from God, offer him your hand and request him to shake hands with you. If he will be an angel, he will do so, and you will feel his hand. If he be the spirit of a just man made perfect, he will come in his glory, for that is the only way he can appear. Ask him to shake hands with you, but he will not move, because it is contrary to the order of heaven for a just man to deceive. But he will still deliver his message. If it be the devil as an angel of light, when you ask him to shake hands, he will offer you his hand, and you will not feel anything. You may therefore detect him. These are three grand keys whereby you may know whether any administration is from God. So that's it. That is section 129. So on its surface, without any further context, it may be easy to not see this as having anything explicitly to do with the temple.
Hmm.
But as we're going to talk about today, that couldn't be further from the truth. There's so much here that you talk about in your paper and in your article, um, that connects this with several different aspects or layers, even of depth related to the temple and the resurrection. Um, and I would point out too, um, for Latter Day Saints listening who have been through the temple, who have um, who have gone through the temple, you will remember certain portions of the temple may come to mind as you read through this section. And as you listen to this conversation between Spencer and I, this idea of uh, handshakes or hand clasps or as tokens being used as keys to detect whether a messenger is from God or not. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind too, as kind of the thread that connects us. So I appreciate you, Spencer, for kind of indulging me there for a moment. But getting back to 18 was it 1839, wherein we
Yeah.
have Joseph as early as I believe June, right? You said
Yeah, June 27th, 1839. Uh, and I'm glad that you brought that up and we read through that because when you read through section 129, it would be easy to just kind of gloss over everything and not see the context that this is offered in. But, as I mentioned, Joseph gives these instructions multiple times. One of my favorite, precisely because it offers this context, is on May 1st, 1842. This is 3 days before the first endowments are given on May 4th, 1842, in the upper room of the Red Brick Store,
Star Wars
keeping
Day.
that in mind. So Joseph taught that the keys that are discussed in section 129 and that he had discussed earlier with the apostles in 1839 as they are certain signs and words by which false spirits and personages may be detected from true, which cannot be revealed to the elders till the temple is completed. The devil knows many signs, but does not know the sign of the Son of Man or Jesus. And no one can truly say he knows God until he has handled something. And this can only be in the holiest of holies. So Joseph Smith is clearly connecting all of this to what will happen in the temple. And so, as you read section 129, Stephen Harper in his commentary on the Doctrine and Covenants, he wrote that this is euphemistic. It's no more about shaking hands than the phrase kicking the bucket is about someone kicking a bucket. So there's something much deeper going on here. And that, there are bounds placed on the devil. We can tell that. And because, if I were the devil and I had known this, I just wouldn't offer to shake anyone's hands. But it's clear that he's bound to do so in some capacity, and that God's power, compels him to do so as a sign to us that whatever happens in this handshake, we can know that we're dealing with a true messenger or Satan. And so we get all of this, and it's connected very closely to uh, the temple. And so Joseph Smith is using this hand clasp in two different capacities here. Um, and I think especially with its connection to the temple, they're one and the same uh, ritual that's probably being referred to here. Uh, and especially when it comes to the resurrection of the dead, we find ample evidence that early Jews and Christians believed that in the resurrection there would be some sort of sacred embrace between parties in this act of resurrecting one another. And we find this in the Bible and in other early Jewish and Christian texts, if we wanted to dive into that next.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out too, because so May 1st, he gave that statement
Hmm.
to kind of, I think, maybe prepare the 12 and those in attendance for the eventual instructions in the presentation of the endowment in the red brick store just a few
Yeah.
days later. Um, and both historians and critics alike will be apt to point out that only 2 months prior to this, in March of 1842, Joseph joined the Freemasons. And so a lot of critics are very quick to point out, there wasn't a quick turnaround between Joseph joining the Masons at the time and the sort of development of the presentation of the endowment that he prepared for the brethren in the red brick store in May. And while a lot has been said by both Latter day Saint historians and faithful members, as well as critics alike, with regards to the connection between Freemasonry and the presentation of the endowment and specifically the signs and tokens, um, it is very interesting to point out that you included in your works here, but I want to double back and make mention of it, that Joseph actually is talking about sacred handclasps 3 years earlier in 1839. That's
Yeah.
3 years prior to joining the Masons. So he already had in mind some sort of ritual embrace or ritual handclasp of some kind or another in mind. And I think maybe um, it just may well have been that joining the Masons at the time gave him a little bit of clarity into what those tokens, those sacred handclasps, may look like in form, in order to present them to the church for its specific sacred function in the temple. So maybe kind of at the time back in 1839, and again, it may be that he spoke on this earlier than that. We just don't have anything recorded specifically,
Hmm.
at least as far as we're aware. It's possible he was talking about some sort of sacred embrace or hand clasp as part of the connection to the temple prior to June of 1839. Regardless, it seems obvious to me that he had a very 30,000 foot view throughout his ministry in the Kirtland period, um, that eventually developed enough for him to kind of hone in and zoom in on certain aspects in the Nauvoo period that I don't think he was maybe necessarily prepared, or maybe the church wasn't prepared for at the time prior to that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's just kind of from a gloss over those years of going from transitioning from Missouri and Kirtland to Nauvoo. That seems to me to be a very reasonable kind of explanation for what's going on, at least in Joseph's mind.
Oh yeah. And I think especially we can already see as early as 1839 that this is something on Joseph's mind, that connecting with the divine in this sacred embrace or hand clasp was something that was expected for the saints to do. And I think it's entirely reasonable that when Joseph became a Mason, that did still serve as a catalyst for the way that it could be presented for how the saints could do this. But he didn't get this idea from Freemasonry. A great work on the topic of Joseph Smith and Freemasonry is Jeff Bradshaw's book, published by the Interpreter Foundation. Um, I'm blanking on the name. It's like Freemasonry and let me. But anyways, if you go to the Interpreter Foundation's website, you'll easily find it. One thing that he does point out is pretty much everything that people will point to as uh, a connection between Joseph Smith and Masonry we see earlier in the Bible. Even this idea of taking God by the hand is something that shows up in the Psalms, oftentimes a bit hidden in the King James English translation, and it's something that I know some scholars, such as Don Perry, have even pointed to as being present in Isaiah, as Isaiah 55, verse 6,
Right.
could probably be translated as, within my house and within my walls, I will give them a hand and a name. Um,
Yeah.
and that's how Don Perry translates it, and others. This is the idea of, taking God by the hand in a temple, especially in a coronation type setting, is something that, people have pointed out for years in the Bible. And
Yeah.
so it's something that I think certainly plays into this is that, you know, um, Freemasonry is as great as it was, it just kind of served as a catalyst for people and a way to prepare them for the temple endowment, which was something much better and greater that, Joseph already had in his mind all of the pieces for this well before 1842.
Yeah. And they serve different functions.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Um,
so while in form they are the same or similar, um, and I've I've talked to other Latter Day Saints who are Freemasons. In fact, a friend of mine, Hayden Carroll, who you might be aware of,
mhm.
is a Freemason. He's come on the channel. We've spent hours talking about his experience in Freemasonry as well. The while the forms are quite similar, the functions are quite different, and Joseph is using these forms specifically for a sacred temple context to teach the principles and keys related to the restored gospel of Christ and the atonement. That's wildly different than what is
Mhm.
going on in Freemasonry at the time that he was a member. I do have the name of that book by Jeffrey Bradshaw,
Yes.
by printed by the Interpreter Foundation. This is called Freemasonry and the Origins of Temple. Excuse me, the Freemasonry and the Origins of Latter Day Saint Temple Ordinances. And that is available on the Interpreter Foundation's website for anybody who is interested. I have a copy, the PDF, as well, and I can attest to the great work that Bradshaw has done with that.
Yeah. No, and just, like you said, as someone who's interested in becoming a Mason myself, I've, from what I've found, the function and the entire purpose of Freemasonry is different than what happens in a temple. And so that I can say, I also have friends who are Latter-day Saints and Masons, and the differences really do outweigh the similarities, whatever there may be. And so I think we can recognize like, yeah, Freemasonry played an important part in the coming forth of the endowment, but we shouldn't ever overstate it to say like it was plagiarized from Freemasonry or anything. And uh, it very clearly is something that Joseph had in his mind well before uh, 1842.
Yeah. Well, I kind of derailed us on that point, but
It's okay. It's a important talking point too. So
yeah, and it's something that gets brought up quite often. So I felt that it would be relevant to at least include a little bit of that discussion here. Um, so with all that said, uh, Joseph, the institution of the presentation of the endowment finally underway in May of 1842. We have statements given later that are included in section 129 of the Doctrine and Covenants from 1843. Um, we have this kind of foundation now set for a modern restoration of temple ritual. So, being that the claim is that these principles are quite ancient and have very specific and relevant meanings to Latter day Saints, not just in its immediate sort of 21st century context, but at a very ancient Jewish and Christian context. Um, there are an awful lot of scriptures and text and things that you referred to in this paper. So I'm going to be really just kind of giddy and happy to just let you kind of run wherever you want to go as we talk about the sacred hand clasp and embraces as they're presented elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I guess just uh, as a primer for this, it would be important to just talk about the connection between the resurrection and the temple. This is something I address at the end of my paper, but it's something that we might as well just bring up now. Is that throughout the ancient Near East, there is a clear connection between the temple as a place of resurrection. Uh, Hugh Nibley noted in some of the coffin texts that there would be a sacred embrace to be a familial recognition in the afterlife, as a man would embrace his family, his father, his mother, his brothers, his sisters, his children, his household, his friends, and all those who've entered a covenant with him. And this is a embrace that was performed at the initiation or enthronement of a king, in which the king would embrace the gods to receive divine power. And this was, all done within a temple context. Um, and this is something we find in the Bible, in Psalm 73. It says, I'm always with you. You have grasped my right hand. With your counsel, you guide me, and afterwards receive me into glory. So this is, again, something that you can see in this psalm. The psalmist is talking about grasping God's hand and being admitted into his presence. This is clearly something that is done in the temple, and throughout, Israelite culture, the concept of um, the coronation and the rites of the temple were connected with the resurrection and being raised up to a greater and higher life. Uh, you know, uh, John D. Levinson said this really well. He's a Jewish scholar who wrote a great book, on the the doctrine of the resurrection in Jewish thought that I cite throughout my paper. He says the temple is the antipode of Sheol, or the realm of the dead, as life is the opposite of death, and praise is the opposite of oblivion. And the temple offered what Levinson calls intimations of immortality. That is the striking perception of the higher and better world than what we now inhabit that has been promised to the faithful. And so through the temple, petitioners essentially experience a resurrection in micro. While we are yet still mortal and we will surely die, we can experience for a moment on earth the blessings that await us in heaven. And so the temple is, it is very clearly connected to the hand clasp throughout all of this. And we'll find in the Bible these references to sacred hand clasps or embraces in clear connection with raising the dead, which is itself a similitude of the resurrection in full. We find quite a few of these in the New Testament. Many people would be well familiar with a lot of these miracles. The first we'll find in the Gospel of Luke, Jairus comes to Jesus and says that his daughter is sick and he needs Jesus to come heal his daughter. And Jesus says, absolutely, let's go. Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well. And when they arrive, they find that Jairus' daughter had died in the time that he had left to go get Jesus and for them to come. Jesus assured them and said, "She is not dead, but sleeping." Then, taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And another miracle is reported in Acts 9. This is done by Peter. It says there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, translated means Dorcas, and after she becomes ill, she died and was prepared for burial. Peter is in a nearby town, and he hears about this, and so he comes over straight away. And it says he knelt down and prayed, and turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, arise." She opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up, and he gave her his hand and raised her up. And there's a third miracle in the New Testament that involves a sacred embrace as well. It's Paul's healing of Eutychus, which is always a funny story. Eutychus is up in a tree as Paul is speaking. Um, he falls asleep. He falls. He dies. Um, Fortunately, Paul is right there because, Paul went down. It says he threw himself on the young man and put his arms around him and says, "Don't be distressed, for he is still alive." And afterwards, he is healed. And the verb that was translated here in the New English translation of the Bible as "put his arms around" could also be rendered as "embrace." So he embraced Eutychus and he was healed. We also see similar miracles in the Old Testament, especially with Elijah and Elisha, where after the widow of Zarepta's son dies, it says Elijah stretched himself upon the child 3 times before he was restored to life. And Elisha similarly raised the Shunammite woman's son with a full body embrace. And it says, laying upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth, eyes upon his eyes, hands upon his hands, while he lay bent over, the flesh of the child became warm. Uh, these do sound a little weird when you just, read them as like them just like laying on top of uh the child, but something that is really going on is there is this idea of this sacred embrace, or this divine act that's being done. No, and
Well, and to take that to a modern LDS temple context as well, and I don't want to be
Mhm.
too explicit here and speak what I ought not to. Um, but if we understand the presentation of the endowment to be essentially taking us back through the steps, uh, you know, towards the presence of our Father in heaven. Um, Remember that when we approach the Lord at the veil, the way that we embrace, the way that we do that part of the presentation, the ritual there, is very much uh, described similarly, at least in my mind, to how these verses are described about eye to eye, hand to hand, what have you.
Mhm.
This is a ritual embrace kind of language here in those verses, and I think for Latter Day Saints who have been through the presentation of the endowment will recognize this kind of similar uh, ritual form happening at the veil.
Yeah, no, that awesome. You said it just as well as I could have. Um,
Well, I did read your paper multiple times, so
yeah. Um, but yeah, and this is something that early Jewish commentators would pick up on as well. I say early, but probably more Middle Ages for this particular text. Um, it's in a text called the Seder Eliyahu Rabbah. It's about these. It's a collection of texts that were all put together by a school of Elijah the prophet. Um, and it talks about the resurrection, that it says, at some time in the days of the Messiah and in the world to come, there will be a revival of the dead by the Holy One, which has been now and then foreshadowed in this world in the revival of the dead by such righteous men as Elijah, Elisha, and Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi. So this is, these later commentators are looking at these miracles and this embrace and saying something like this is going to happen, but in a more perfect and permanent way, because it'll be done by the Holy One himself. you know and it goes on to say, over the dust of such men the Holy One will throw a light as of sparkling dewdrops, will lift them up between his knees, which could be a reference to being enthroned and becoming like God. And then he
Is
will put
this
his
is
arms
this
around.
the being brought between his knees, because this is obviously the Lord sitting on his throne,
Yes.
bringing you between his knees. Is the imagery there like a king being coronated kind of becomes a child to the deity, and
Yeah.
and God raises him up and almost kind of puts him on his lap as a father would put a child on his lap, on his throne.
Yeah, and it's just like with Israelite kings we get in, Psalm 2:7 or 2 Samuel chapter 7. The Israelite king was called the Son of God, and was declared to be the Son of God and should act as though, if he were to make a decision for Israel, he should do his darn best to be sure that that's what God would do. And so I do see that as well, where it's, in this coronation type setting, we're becoming sons of God, ritually, through this embrace. So yeah. Uh, and anyways, this text will go on, and it says that after he set us between his knees, he put his arms around them, hold them close, and kisses them, and thus ushers them into life in the world to come. So it's, you can see again, this clear embrace that's happening between the divine and the resurrected. Um,
And this is happening in the Messianic age, right? So what
yeah,
Christians might call the Parousia.
yes,
Yeah. So this is all morning of the resurrection in the Parousia, or at the second advent of Christ, basically, kind of
yeah,
language.
yeah, and you know, uh, talk about the resurrection in these terms of a sacred handclasp do not just end at the Bible. It continues well into the post-apostolic age and the age of the church fathers and whatnot. And it's found in a lot of early Christian texts that are commonly called New Testament Apocrypha. The I'll just do a little show and tell if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, there are a lot of great collections of these sources. This is one by J.K. Elliott, published through Oxford University Press, the Apocryphal New Testament. It collects a lot of these early texts and, non-canonical gospels and whatnot, and it offers some good commentary on them. If you want a good one-volume stop for the basic, when people say New Testament Apocrypha, this is what they think. I'd say this is a really good option. Another good collection that will contain all the same texts as Eliot does is in 2 volumes, edited by William Schneemelker. It's a German scholar his collection was translated, well, into German and then into English. Volume 1 is all about the Gospels and related writings. Volume 2 is all the, like, Acts of the Apostles and whatnot. This is also a really good, uh, accessible scholarly collection of those same texts. Um, I'm a nerd, so of course I have both. Uh, and then there's this series that's being done by Erdman's right now. There's 3 volumes so far. New Testament Apocrypha, more non-canonical scriptures. So these contain texts outside of what Eliot and Schneemelker had, collected and republished. So If you want, even more, then these are really good sources to go to. Um, and as a final note, I didn't really deal with or there weren't any no, stuff from the Nag Hammadi codices that went along with this. But if you do want to get into that, um, then this is the edition that I have, one of them at least. It's the Gnostic Scriptures, second edition by Bentley Layton and David Brackey. It's published through Yale University Press as part of their Anchor Bible series. This is, a really good translation of those texts with some good commentary on it as well, introductions to the material and whatnot. That doesn't really bear with any of what I'm about to say, but I just thought I'd give it a plug because that's, another well-known collection of New Testament apocryphal sources that, people would probably turn to. So,
Yep. Yeah, those are fantastic. I'm familiar by name with each of those. But the New Testament Apocrypha that you showed first is what I'm most actually familiar with in terms of having perused through it.
yeah.
I will also add too, if you're looking for something more related to the Hebrew Bible and the pseudepigrapha and the intertestamental period texts and so forth, I think Charlesworth's volumes on the pseudepigrapha are kind of hands down the best we have right now. So I
Yes.
would include that as well, kind of in that reading. I know a lot of what we talk about in this discussion and related to your paper and so forth isn't necessarily going to be things found immediately in the pseudepigrapha, but there are a lot of things in those pseudepigraphic texts that are related in some way or another that I also think are uh, worth reading.
Yes, absolutely. And I should have just brought those out as well. The Charlesworth's volumes are, two volume set for him. Hands down the best collection and scholarly compilation to date. And you will find some stuff. I believe I even cited a few things from from those in my paper. At least I know for a fact I did cite some stuff from if you'll recall this Erdmann series New Testament Apocrypha, more non-canonical scriptures. They also have two volumes of Old Testament pseudepigrapha, more non-canonical scriptures, um, which are also really good. And they add to what Charlesworth had collected, kind of like these add to what, Eliot and Schneemelker have published. So th those are also really good sources to look at. I know that volume two of the Erdmann's publication has been on sale on Amazon, quite a bit. Sometimes you can get it as low as like $17 when it's usually like 60 to $90. So I'm just saying, Jeff Bezos sponsor me, Uh, I'm kidding. But yeah, the like if you really want to dive into this stuff, like there are great compilations for that, offer any serious student, plenty of stuff to talk about. And no, th those are just uh the ones that I personally, really recommend. They're the ones that I used in referring to as I gathered the sources for this paper.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate you plugging those as well.
Yeah. No, maybe Erdman should like sponsor this episode, after that. I'm trying to help you, build your base and
Right.
yeah. I'm
You know what?
kidding.
We don't care
Sorry.
who. Just somebody sponsor Spencer
Yeah.
over here.
Yeah, you know what? I could use the cash. I'm kidding, but um anyways, all of that aside, all the jokes aside, no one actually has to sponsor me. I got a pretty good job to do that myself. Um I so those are the main sources that I went through as I went through this and wrote this paper. That if you look at my presentation that I gave to the at the Temple on Mount Zion conference, I was limited by time, and only 30 minutes. So I kind of had to gloss over a lot of this and couldn't really get into the nitty-gritty of what each text said. Fortunately, we are not limited to 30 minutes. We're just limited by other factors. But so I think we can get into a lot more detail here
Yeah.
and citing these texts, which I think will be a hoot and a holler if I'm allowed to speculate. Um, but as you read the a lot of these early Christian texts, you'll find the sacred handclasp, especially in connection with the resurrection of the dead or lifting people up to life, will appear a lot. You know, it. I don't know if you saw any of the sticky tabs I had in them, but I there's quite a few sticky tabs I have that point to these references. And typically, when this action is found, this sacred embrace or hand clasp, it's done in one of three ways in these texts. One is when raising someone from the dead, Jesus or an apostle would take the deceased by the hand, which would typify what would occur at the resurrection. Or second, occasionally the apostle would take a member by the hand and instruct them on how the member could then go out and raise the dead. Um, the third um, the third way that this is presented is when a person is actually resurrected into glory, Jesus or another divine being takes that person by the hand. Um, so as far as the first instance in raising the dead, we see this probably the most. This handclasp appears in the Acts of Peter. This is a text that was known, possibly known to Clement of Alexandria. He mentions an Acts of Peter. It's possible this is the same. And in this text, Peter has this confrontation with Simon Magus. That's a common thing that you'll find in texts about Peter is Simon Magus tends to be an absolute jerk, and Peter always has to deal with him. And so uh, throughout this confrontation, um, a prefect comes and notes that this boy has died. And so Peter said to the boy's master, "Come, take his right hand, and you shall have him alive and able to walk with you." And Agrippa the prefect ran and came to the boy, and taking his hand, restored him to life. And when the crowd saw it, they all cried out, "There is but one God, the one God of Peter." In the same text, shortly afterwards, the mother of a senator likewise came to Peter and asked him to raise her son to life. In a second contest with Simon Magus, Peter again demonstrated that God is superior by successfully raising the boy from the dead. It says Peter touched the boy's side and said, "Stand up." Later, when addressing the crowd, he taught, "Men of Rome, this is how the dead are restored to life. This is how they speak. This is how they walk when they are raised up, and live for so long as God wills." And just given that this immediately follows the raising of two individuals by a hand clasp or some sort of embrace or physical contact, Peter's words may be interpreted to refer to the sacred embrace they had just witnessed. This embrace is how the dead are restored to life. No, and another apostle that often gets mention of these is John. John has a lot of, apocryphal acts relating to him. One of them is the Acts of John. This is a really cool text because of other things that it talks about. Hugh Nibley, for instance, was quick to note that there appears to be reference to some sort of prayer circle at one point in the text as the apostles all gathered around Jesus and repeated the words of his prayer and whatnot. So it's a very interesting text for many reasons. One of these, I I think, is because it references this handclasp in connection to raising the dead. You know, after John had heard that the praetor Lycomedes died, his wife Cleopatra asks John to heal him. So it says the apostle went up to the couch on which Lycomedes lay, and taking Cleopatra's hand, John instructed her what she should say so she could raise her husband herself. And though a handclasp is not mentioned explicitly, It is strongly implied, as it says she went near and spoke to her husband, and immediately raised him up. And and he arose and fell to the ground and kissed John's feet, but he lifted him up. So it seems to be implied that there's someone raising him and lifting him, which would imply hand clasp or embrace. And elsewhere in this text, we have two instances that are close to each other. There's a righteous woman named Drusiana who had died. And so it says, John made no delay, but went to her grave and took Drusiana's hand and said, Drusiana, arise. She arose at once and came out of the grave. Just prior to this incident, there was a wicked man who had broken into her grave to defile her corpse. Uh, we don't need to get into the details of how, but he was it would have broken the law of chastity, we'll just say. And God, protecting the dignity of the Saint Drusiana, had some angels take care of him, and this man died. Well, Drusiana sees, his name was Fortunatus, was the wicked man's name. She sees Fortunatus's body, and she immediately forgives him of, attempting to defile her body. And so she requests to John that Fortunatus be raised to life again so that he can have a chance to repent and move on and live the gospel. So John says yes, he authorizes her to do this. So she grasped the dead man's hand and said, Rise up, Fortunatus, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, even though you were in the highest degree an enemy of the handmaid of God. And Fortunatus rose up. Unfortunately, he did not repent. He didn't want to repent. And so he goes out and he soon perishes again. There are other acts of John, One of these is the Acts of John in Rome. This one likely postdates Constantine's reign. So, when we say like New Testament Apocrypha, there is a wide range of years that these are all written in. And this one is also really fun because so a lot of saints would probably be familiar with the traditional story that uh, John was to be executed, but they couldn't kill him. And so they eventually sent him to Patmos. The most typical story is they tried throwing John in boiling oil, and he's just not able to be harmed. This story presents that same thing, but it offers another method of execution, which I think is kind of fun. Just the way that the story presents everything. It says the Emperor Domitian attempted to give him poison, which had no effect on John. And so the emperor and his guards are like, well, what the heck, man? You're supposed to be dead by now. So they called in another prisoner who's supposed to be executed. They give him the same poison, and this prisoner dies. Um, and John is like, well, hold on. I don't want anyone to say that he died. Like, I'm the reason this guy died. So he prayed to the Lord, asking God to restore to the prisoner his soul, so that Domitian might learn the word of God is much more powerful than poison and is master of death and life. Then, having taken his hand, he raised him living. So he's able to raise the poor guy who's just poisoned. Um, there's another related text called the Acts of John by Prochorus, which date to the 5th or 6th century. And it records 3 miracles in which John is asked to bring the dead back to life. And in each instance, he did so by taking the dead by the hand. One is John heard that this guy named Dioscorides' son had been drowned. So when John heard this, having become joyful indeed, he withdrew from her. He rushed into the bath and banished the unclean demon and brings home the soul of the boy. He then took him by the hand and led him out alive. Again, you'll find a lot of language relating to a ritual embrace there, through that. Um, after this, after Dioscorides had died, So John, having taken Dioscorides, although dead by his right hand, said, Dioscorides, Dioscorides, in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, arise. And immediately the dead man arose, and the crowds were amazed at the miracles performed by John. And finally, uh, the Malchus's corpse was brought before John, and John took him by the right hand and said to him, in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, rise. And immediately he arose. So you'll see, throughout all of these, it's, the same theme is happening where someone is dead, John takes him by the hand, raises him up alive. Um, the Acts of Thomas is another text where this happens. You know, where there is one overzealous disciple who slew a woman. Thomas helps the man repent, and through the repentance process, and instructs this man how he could raise the woman back to life in order so the man could fully repent and right his wrong. He says, Go take her hand and say to her, I with my hands did slay thee with iron. With my hands by faith in Jesus I raise thee up. And so when he does so, uh, she lives. There's another text called the Acts of Paul, sometimes called the Acts of Paul and Thecla. This is a fun text because we know a little bit about who wrote it. Tertullian says that the guy who wrote it was convicted for his forgery, which he did out of his love for Paul. So we have this, early Christian fanfic, basically, that they know who wrote it, and he said, "Well, I just love Paul so much, so of course I wanted to write something about him." So it is interesting just because this is something that an early Christian is writing, and it reflects these early Christian ideas that they have going on even up to this time. And it says that Frontina had died. Um, she was this righteous saint. So Paul took the daughter in his arms and groaned to the Lord Jesus Christ. In that hour, Frontina rose up, and all the crowd was afraid and fled. And Paul took the daughter's hand and brought her to her family alive. So again, we see a sacred embrace in taking the daughter in his arms, and then again the hand clasp in leading her out to her family. And there's another text that talks about Cornelius the centurion, who's not an apostle, doing a very similar thing. This is called the Acts and Consummation of the Holy Cornelius the Centurion. Um, and this Cornelius is the guy mentioned in Acts chapter 10, early convert to the church, whose conversion kind of stirred up a lot of water, for the early church, because it would lead to this discussion on, uh, you know, circumcision and whatnot. But it's so this text is written much much later, and sometime between the 4th and 10th centuries AD. So there's a wide range as to when this could have been written, but it details the transferal of Cornelius's body after he had died to a shrine, and it lists various 4th century bishops who had cared for the shrine. One of these was named Philostorgius, uh, who wanted a mural in this shrine. So he exhorted a certain painter to paint the entire shrine, carefully craft an image of Cornelius himself. This painter was named Encratius, and he was having a hard time crafting an image of Cornelius for the shrine, since he had never seen him. And so one day, out of frustration, it says he sent irreverent voices toward the Holy One Cornelius before he fell from a ladder and died. The spirit of Cornelius, however, forgave Encratius, and appearing the next day, Cornelius took his right hand and raised him as if he were sleeping. Um, so you do get the same thing where, a righteous disciple, even in this instance, a righteous disciple who's since dead, takes someone by the hand and raises him. as if he were sleeping. Um, there are also two accounts of Jesus doing something similar. One is in the infancy gospel of Thomas, which is, a fun text in and of itself, if not only for the fact that Nicolas Cage, I don't know if you heard this, is starring in a horror movie focused on that's an adaptation of the infancy gospel of Thomas, which is fun news in and of itself. Nicolas Cage, what can the man not do?
That would not have been on my bingo card.
Yeah, like it absolutely would not be on my 2025 bingo card, but here we are, a horror movie about Jesus, and the infancy gospel of Thomas, which, whatever, just a
Yeah.
fun fact for your listeners. Uh,
Hollywood's gonna Hollywood.
yeah, Hollywood's gonna always do this. Anyways, in better news, don't watch the movie if you want a faithful adaptation of the life of Jesus Christ. The book is better, and by that I mean the actual Bible. But even the actual infancy gospel of Thomas too, um, but it has this incident, uh, which, just as a full disclosure, I don't believe the infancy gospel of Thomas actually relates any of Jesus's childhood
Right.
accurately, but it is something that these are early Christians who are writing about this, and they're, you know, using the worldview that they have in discussing this, But in this text, a construction worker was killed while building a house. So the young Jesus arose and went there, and seeing a man lying dead, he took his hand and said, I say unto you, man, arise and do your work. And he immediately arose. The second text is also really interesting and worth its own discussion in and of itself. It's the Secret Gospel of Mark. Have you ever heard of that, Jacob?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that it's something very many people would look into, but
Yeah.
a couple years ago I did read a little bit about it.
Yeah. So this text is really interesting in and of itself because it was preserved in a letter, a purported letter, I should say, by Clement of Alexandria, in which he mentions that there are two Gospels of Mark. One is the one that we have in our Bible that is for everyone that's sent out to everyone, and the second one is for those being initiated into the mysteries or higher ordinances. And this apostate sect had gotten a hold of a copy of the secret gospel and were corrupting it to use it for their own wicked, and perverted purposes. And
And
so
and by the way, if I can interject for just a moment, this kind of practice doesn't seem to be too uncommon either of um having sort of a main text that's more publicly accessible or for a particular group, and then also having maybe another letter or something accompanying it that is specific for particular individuals that gives some more detail or some more instruction or things that are specific to the administration of things related to the church or what have you. That information that might not have been publicly accessible to the entire congregation or the people of that town or what have you. And we see this not just in in uh, early Christianity, but it happens kind of all over the place in the Mediterranean. This happens in um, certainly we have texts in Mesopotamia and Sumerian and Akkadian in which portions of a text are meant to be read aloud to a group, and then other portions of the text are explicitly sort of marked to only be read by priests or something similar. Um, and so yeah, it's very fascinating to see further evidence and things like that, and the infancy gospel
Mhm.
as well in a more Christian context.
yeah, and just with this, this was discovered by a man named Morton Smith in the late 20th century. Uh, the secret gospel is, widely debated as to whether it's authentic or not. Some people accuse Morton Smith of forging the entire thing. Uh, I will note here, however, two books. One is Mark's Other Gospel: Rethinking Morton Smith's Controversial Discovery by a man named Scott G. Brown, who does argue for the authenticity of this text, uh, pretty well, I would argue. I would say, at least as an actual Clementine letter, you know. Another book is The Secret Gospel of Mark, a controversial scholar, scandalous gospel of Jesus, and the fierce debate over its authenticity by Jeffrey S. Smith and Brent C. Landau. They do not argue that Morton Smith forged it. They do not argue that Clement actually wrote the letter. They argue that it may have been a monk at this monastery who wrote this letter in Clement's name, which is another, common practice. And so I just throw those out there. And then a note that Wilfred Griggs in the 2022 Temple on Mount Zion conference, this book is published right now. Um, and you can find his presentation, or read his presentation in the book itself. He says that he met with Morton Smith and spent more time with him than he would have liked. But through all of this, he came to the conclusion that Morton Smith just simply he did not have the skills necessary to forge this letter. And I've spoken with and closely with another professor who has spent a lot of time reading Clementine literature, and he notes that, whatever you may think, this text containing the secret gospel of Mark reads like Clement of Alexandria. And so I'm not going to put any money on whether or not it's authentic or not, whether a monk, wrote it in Clement's name or whether Clement himself wrote this letter. But I will just point all of that out to say, we shouldn't just blindly dismiss this as a modern forgery, because there are really good arguments for why it, at least, if it doesn't date to Clement of Alexandria or earlier, it at least, could be traced within this medieval Middle Ages monastery, you know. But all of this is to get to the actual text of the Secret Gospel of Mark. One of the portions that is cited in this appears to be a alternate retelling of the healing of Lazarus from John 11, where, according to this text, Jesus went in where the young man was, stretched out his hand, and raised him up, grasping him by the hand. And so again, we see this idea that Jesus would go in, he'd take the dead by the hand, and raise him up to life. So that is, something we find throughout the New Testament apocryphal sources and whatnot. This is something that early Christians were thinking of and talking about a lot. The second way, or the second way, was, how the apostle could take someone by the hand and teach them how to raise others from the dead. That also we kind of just threw in this discussion as well. So the third point is the resurrection of the dead itself, the glorious resurrection. And
Maybe before we get into the
yes,
actual resurrection side of things, because you brought it up just a bit ago, Hugh Nibley had written about the Acts of John, or at least a number of these different texts that you also mention here, in his work on the early Christian prayer circle. I do want to make mention too of a couple things that Hugh Nibley notes in that paper, that kind of situate the early Christian prayer circle within this broader discussion. as well. And so, kind of early on in his paper, he discusses and shares and quotes from some of these texts, like the Acts of John, being one he refers to several times. Um, he talks about how a number of these texts and letters between Cyril of Jerusalem and others are referencing a very real ritual practice of this sort of Christian prayer circle that's happening in those early centuries. And they describe it where you can glean from it. And I think maybe Cyril and a few others are a little bit more explicit and instructive into how this ritual prayer circle is to be performed. But certainly we see it throughout a number of these other texts, like the Acts of John that you mentioned and so forth, where it's the instructions aren't given for how it's performed, but it's certainly giving you a look at implicit reference.
Mhm.
Cyril of Jerusalem and a few others are giving some more explicit references and instructions. And how they describe this as happening is a sort of ritual in which a group of people come together and sort of form this circle or dance around an altar of some kind, usually with a bishop or somebody standing in the middle representing Christ. And we even have one of these early Christian texts with Christ actually administering this ritual to the apostles with Peter and Mary and others. And Christ is the one standing in their midst, so to speak. But in any case, the individuals here that gather together for this ritual embrace each other and give each other by the hand and so forth, and link up, so to speak, around the altar, around the person in the center, and they pray together as they dance around this altar. And so um, we do have some references, even some explicit references here to what's going on here. Now, where that is, I think, directly applicable to our discussion of hand clasps with respect to the resurrection and Christ specifically, is it seems to be, at least Hugh Nibley notes here, as he references Cyril of Jerusalem, that it seems to be that Cyril, this is around 350 AD, seems to be connecting the dots of this ritual and the sort of the elements of the ritual, probably referring to the sacred hand clasp or something similar to the embrace or something, as being explicit in its connection to the atonement of Christ. And so he does quote in Nibley's paper. Nibley quotes from Cyril of Jerusalem, in which, if you'll indulge me, I'll just quote this like
Yeah, absolutely.
couple of lines here. It's pretty short. Cyril of Jerusalem, writing around 350 AD, says, "O strange and paradoxical a thing, we did not die in reality." Speaking of himself, I think, and those he's writing to, we did not die in reality, but after having been actually crucified, rather it was an imitation by a token. O love of men overflowing, Christ really received the nails in his blameless hands and feet and suffered pain, while I, without any pain or struggle, by his sharing of suffering the pain, enjoy the fruits of salvation. To me, and I think what Nibley is getting at when he quotes from this, it seems to be saying that Cyril of Jerusalem is probably likening what's happening in this ritual prayer circle uh, as being an explicit reference to the crucifixion of Christ, and that he and those his contemporaries who he's writing to receive the crucifixion and atonement of Christ through the ritual without having to actually suffer the pain that Christ suffered on the cross in reality. And I think there seems to be quite a lot of gratitude there in Cyril's writing. Um, and so, um, to me, I don't know if the tokens that he's referring to are specifically referencing the ritual hand clasp or embrace that takes
Mhm.
place in the ritual prayer circle. But I think you can make that implication here from Cyril's words as as they're as they have their place in the broader context of Nibley's paper. Um, Also, I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, I believe Cyril of Jerusalem, recognizing that some of these rituals, like the prayer circle, was starting to um, disappear from uh, sort of everyday Christian worship. I believe he tried to make an attempt to sort of bring it back, and be more. Um, I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but he tried to basically give a little mini restoration of sorts to some of these rituals within their Christian communities. And unfortunately for him, I don't think it held. Um, but if I remember correctly, I think it was Cyril of Jerusalem who was kind of um, worried about the loss of some of these rituals amongst the Christian community in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and even Cyril of Jerusalem would also go on uh, to in his catechetical lectures 15:9. Um, you know, he cited Paul that there would come a falling away first, and he said, thus wrote Paul, now is the falling away, for men have fallen away from the right faith. Formerly the heretics were manifest, but now the church is filled with heretics in disguise. So this is something that he recognized, that there was this apostasy that was happening, and he's recognizing all of this going on, just like you were saying.
Yeah, he seemed to be quite concerned with it.
Yes, he was. Uh,
So I don't know. I find that interesting in the context of Nibley's paper as it relates to the prayer circle, and how Cyril may be connecting the dots between the prayer circle and the specific tokens or embrace that happens in that ritual ordinance, as being an explicit reference to the crucifixion of Christ, which is to me part and parcel with how we think of it today and in all these other texts that you've mentioned with respect to the resurrection of Christ.
mhm. And I will also just note that, one thing that we do need to keep in mind as we read all of this is we should not expect to find in any of these texts a clear one-to-one for any ordinances of the temple, right? Especially because uh, early Christians kept sacred things secret. They often didn't allow non-members to see baptisms or any ordinances like that. Whereas, today we don't mind if, non-members come to see baptisms, but that was something that was especially of concern for the early church. In the Clementine recognitions, probably not written by Clement of Rome himself, but Clement, as the story goes, was investigating the church at this time, and he asked Peter about, well, how will people be saved if they died before Jesus was born, And instead of discussing, proxy ordinances or anything, it reports, Peter says, you compel me, O Clement, to touch upon things that are unspeakable, but so far as it is allowed to declare them, I will not shrink from doing so. So this is, even with these sacred ordinances, Peter was saying, well, hold on. You're trying to get me to talk about things that I can't talk about openly, but I'll do my best to explain everything as well as I can. And so we should find, expect to find stuff like this where, we, as you mentioned with Cyril, like it's not explicitly laid out, but we, as Latter-day Saints, will see something, and we're in a really good position to uh, recognize some of the stuff that's going on. Hugh Nibley and his scholarship did a lot of that. um, there are others who will try and do that as well, but less responsibly. Some books might be published that, or articles that will try and make these wild claims. So with that in mind as well, just do keep in mind like what sources you're reading, because some of them, you know, won't actually treat things responsibly. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
And we have, other explicit references in the gospels of I'm thinking of the parables that Jesus
oh yeah,
gives, and the explicit instruction that he gives things in parables specifically to keep certain knowledge from those who aren't ready to receive it. Um, you know, talking about the mysteries and so forth with respect to the inquiry of the apostles. Why do you speak in parables to these people? There is a precedent here going on in the ancient world that sacred things are meant to be kept sacred, and so for those who aren't prepared to receive it, less is more. And I
yeah,
and I I really respect and appreciate the admonition for caution. Um, I think I have been a little too quick at times to make connections of things and want to see a one to one. And I agree. I think Latter day Saints are in a pretty unique position to recognize specific elements of ritual and even theology and so forth put forth by a number of these older texts and you know stele and archaeology that we find that makes reference to things going on and what have you. But as I've kind of mentioned before on other videos, as we discuss some of these topics, I'm really comfortable talking about rituals like the early Christian prayer circle and stuff in the
mhm,
context of the early Christian prayer circle as we have
yeah,
from those texts. I'm not going to talk about the ins and outs of the modern LDS temple ritual that we refer to as a prayer circle in quite as explicit terms. And
yeah,
there's a reason for that. And I think that one of the reasons I think we can talk about some of these things in their ancient context is because they're not directly a one to one in every aspect. And so we can
hmm,
sort of make mention of things, point out maybe some similarities or things that we would immediately recognize and that would be meaningful for us, uh, without calling direct attention to certain aspects of the ritual as performed today in its modern context, which we hold sacred and wouldn't want others to denigrate or speak ill of. And so, trying to do so responsibly is kind of a tightrope, but at times. But if we can do our best in that arena, then I think that opens up the world to be able to talk about things a little bit more freely in certain aspects than we otherwise would. Um, but yeah, and folks like Nibley and others have always sought to bring these concepts, these ideas, to the forefront so that we can talk about them in a way that frees us up to talk about them without the risk of maybe going off and talking about things that we ought not to with respect to our own modern restored um, temple rights.
yeah, and I especially just had in mind too, like with a lot of these, early apocryphal texts. You'll see that I was very careful in dating them and just, saying like, look, these aren't we should not read these as, lost scriptures that, this some evil scribes had excised from the canon, because oftentimes they aren't. I shouldn't even say oftentimes they, aren't. And you can't we can reliably date these to certain points. We should, in reading going through all of that, we shouldn't look at any of that and just say like, oh my gosh, these texts deserve to be in the canon, because, oftentimes they don't. There's a reason they're not in the canon. Uh, and so we can look at these responsibly and point these things out like, hey, this is, how this aspect of the early Christian worldview was seen, but we shouldn't, go nuts and say like, well, if this text mentions this, then the whole thing must be cool, you know, if that makes
Right. Yeah.
sense. You, I just note that because I know that some people, not you, you've been a really good at this from all of the interactions we've had.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, yeah,
Spencer said I'm good.
yeah, you're pretty cool. Um, but there will be some people who just read some of this stuff and they go to town and make a lot of really uh, irresponsible claims that they shouldn't. So if you guys ever, if your audience ever comes across that, just keep all of that in mind. Just consider who's saying this. How are they using their sources? Are they being, trying to date this responsibly, etc. Because you'll find a lot of stuff out there. But it's always best to just treat these sources as they deserve to be treated in the context that they're given, in their early Christian or early Jewish worldview, not, us trying to impose anything on them as, some historical conspiracy or anything like that.
Well, and I will say
Uh,
too, there's a reason there's a restoration and
yeah,
modern prophets and apostles.
yeah,
Um, if we had everything we needed from ancient documents and all we needed was just to study them and try to interpret them, uh, we wouldn't have need for further revelation. But that's not the Lord's plan, as Latter-day Saints believe. And so um, we can respect these texts. We can learn a lot from them. They're quite
oh,
fascinating.
absolutely. Yeah,
And that's why we're talking about them.
yeah.
But we also recognize that we have modern prophets and apostles to receive public revelation for the church today on the things that we're supposed to be focused on today and the way that the temple operates today and as restored through Joseph Smith and Brigham Young onwards, um, and will continue to be developed and restored, is what is immediately important for us in how we worship. And so um, maybe give that some thought as we, not you Spencer, but just
Yeah.
generally maybe we remember we're in a restoration, we're with ongoing public revelation, and
Mhm.
that's what's going to be most immediately important to focus on.
Yeah. Amen to that. Um, anyways, if you're down, or if we wanted to talk any more on this, we could, or we could continue on
Yeah, I
with,
I know you want to get to stuff about the resurrection.
yes,
I think there's some really cool stuff about the resurrection of Christ being directly related, as well as the resurrection.
yeah,
Um, the Perusia, what Paul refers to in First Corinthians 15. Um, I do want to make mention too, while we're talking about instances in not only canonical scripture in the New Testament, but also these early Christian texts and apocryphal texts and so forth. I do want to also bring up too, because it's not in your paper, a couple references to the Book of Mormon as well. And so this was something that I started thinking about after having read your paper um, the first time. Um, Trying to think back through restoration scripture, the Book of Mormon, and even instances from the lives of the early saints in the modern restoration era. Um, and I noted a couple places in the Book of Mormon that I think are really fascinating and directly relate to what we've been talking about. So, with respect to the idea that whether it's Jesus and the raising of the daughter of Jairus or or Peter and is it Tabitha?
Yes.
And a few other references in Scripture and in the New Testament, as well as Elijah and Elisha in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. We do have in the Book of Mormon a couple of references to a sort of embrace or maybe hand clasp related to lifting one from death or raising one from death or something similar. So this is found, and this is what I immediately thought of when I was reading your paper. Um, this is found in Alma. This is chapters 18 and 19, as well as chapter 22. Those familiar with the Book of Alma will immediately remember these are the chapters all about the sons of Mosiah. Ammon goes off and preaches to the people of King Lamoni and his household. And then Aaron, a few chapters later, we read about him preaching to Lamoni's father and so forth. Something really cool in here that I want to bring up, and if you'll indulge me, I'll read a few verses from each of these chapters. So this is Alma chapter 19 with Ammon and King Lamoni and his household. Now, at the end of chapter 18, the prior chapter, um, Ammon's brought before Lamoni and essentially teaches Lamoni the gospel. He teaches them about creation and so forth, Adam and Eve, and a number of other things. And then at the end of chapter 18, we have this interesting thing that happens, which some people will read and think is kind of odd or just weird, and also kind of odd and weird that this happens twice. It happens to Lamoni and again later to Lamoni's father. Um, but what happens is Lamoni, after receiving the words of Ammon, it says in verse 41, he began to cry unto the Lord. This is Lamoni. O Lord, have mercy according to thy abundant mercy, which thou hast had upon the people of Nephi, have upon me and my people. And now when he said this, he fell unto the earth as if he were dead. And it came to pass that his servants took him and carried him in unto his wife and laid him upon a bed. And he lay as if he were dead for the space of 2 days and 2 nights. And his wife and his sons and his daughters mourned over him after the manner of the Lamanites, greatly lamenting his loss. And that's how chapter 18 ends. And we begin chapter 19 here. It says, and it came to pass after 2 days and 2 nights, they were about to take his body and lay it in a sepulchre, which they had made for the purpose of burying their dead. Now the queen, having heard of the fame of Ammon, therefore she sent and desired that he should come in unto her. And so she brings in Ammon, and they have a conversation about Lamoni and Ammon's intentions and what's going on. And it's made known by the servants of Lamoni to the queen that he's a prophet of God and has power to do mighty works in God's name. Um, and there's this funny little quip about whether or not Lamoni stinks or stinketh. But as we go on through this chapter, what happens is the queen, believing Ammon is a prophet and desiring him to teach them and also to obviously bless her and her household by raising Lamoni from this sleep, so to speak. Says that therefore, according to the queen's desires, therefore Ammon went in to see the king according to the queen and had desired him, and he saw the king, and he knew that he was not dead, and said unto the queen, he's not dead, but he sleepeth in God, and on the morrow he shall rise again, therefore bury him not. And she believes his words. And then it says a few verses down, says in okay, so this is verse 12. And it came to pass that King Lamoni arose according to the words of Ammon, and as he arose, he stretched forth his hand unto the woman, his queen, and said, blessed be the name of God, and blessed art thou. For as sure as thou livest, behold, I have seen my Redeemer, and he shall come forth and be born of a woman, and he shall redeem all mankind who believe on his name. Now, when he had said these words, his heart was swollen within him, and he sunk again with joy, and the queen also sunk down, being overpowered by the spirit. So both now, after having arose and grabbed the hand of his queen, spoke about the seeing the Redeemer. They both sunk. Now they're both in this sleep state. Um, and when we get down towards the end of the chapter, um, we have this come back up again. Um, let's see, what verse am I at here? Um, okay, so we have Abish, uh, and she goes and tells a bunch of people, and they all come, and there's a big, spat and what's going on, and um, when we get further down the chapter towards, let's see, 29, it says, and it came to pass that she went and took the queen by the hand, that perhaps she might raise her from the ground. And as soon as she touched her hand, she arose and stood upon her feet and cried with a loud voice, saying, O blessed Jesus, who had saved me from an awful hell, O blessed God, have mercy on this people. And when she had said this, she clasped her hands, being filled with joy, speaking many words which were not understood. And when she had done this, she took the king Lamoni by the hand, and behold, he arose and stood upon his feet. So this happens twice in the same chapter, in chapter 19, where first Lamoni is raised by the hand, and then later both Lamoni and the queen are raised by the hand. Um, then this happens again to King Lamoni's father, who's being taught by Aaron. Um, and obviously, I'm skipping a whole lot of narrative and what's going on in the context of the story here. But after Aaron teaches King Lamoni's father, um, let's see. Okay, so we're in verse 22. Now, when Aaron saw the determination of the queen, he also, knowing the hardness of the hearts of the people, feared lest that a multitude should assemble themselves together and there should be a great contention and a disturbance among them. This obviously because the king had fallen as if he were dead, and the people are kind of in an uproar trying to figure out what's going on. Um, and he says, therefore, he put forth his hand and raised the king from the earth and said unto him, stand. And he stood upon his feet, receiving strength. Now, this was done in the presence of the queen and many of the servants. And when they saw it, they greatly marveled and began to fear. And the king stood forth and began to minister unto them, and he did minister unto them insomuch that his whole household were converted to the Lord. So we have three instances of this happening, this very thing, in the space of 4 chapters in Alma, which I found fascinating and couldn't believe that I had never made this connection before to these passages from the New Testament and the Gospels and so forth.
Yeah, and I do briefly mention that in EndNote 20, specifically because the same thing that we see in the Book of Mormon is actually a fourth way that the hand clasp is used in these early Christian texts as well. But just, for the sake of, time and I just decided to focus on those where the person was actually dead. Um, but you do see that in these early Christian documents as well, where someone is close to death, they're at the point of death, they're terribly sick, they're lying as if they were dead, and the apostle comes and takes them by the hand and lifts them up. And I do think that that is related, in a way.
Don't take away my discovery, Spencer.
No, I'm
I'm
sorry.
just kidding.
You can have it. You can have it. But no, I mentioned John Levinson before. His book I highly recommend. It's called Resurrection and the Restoration of Israel: The Ultimate Victory of the God of Life. I don't think I gave the name of the book before, but he notes that ancient Israelites, he says, they saw illness as continuous with death. and thought of the reversal of illness as so miraculous as to be in the nature of a resurrection, and the semantic range of death in biblical Hebrew includes both disease and biological cessation. So these miraculous healings, like we see in the Book of Mormon, absolutely, I think, fit into this pattern, and uh this, sacred embrace of resurrection. Sorry, I didn't mean to take anything away from you. I was just like, oh, I can share some more thoughts on that too. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I appreciate
Uh,
that. And yeah, there's references to it in your paper, but you didn't quote through all these
yeah,
passages, and so
no.
I wanted
So
to read them at least for the listeners here,
yeah, and I'm glad you
because I think
did.
they're really cool.
Yeah. Maybe next time we could go on and have a discussion on all the instances where you have people who are laying as if they were dead,
Yeah,
you know. Um, but that absolutely is something that I'm glad you brought up, because it's absolutely related as far as I'm concerned. Uh,
yeah. Um, so uh this fourth means of using hand clasp related directly to the resurrection.
yes.
Um,
Mhm.
so why don't you take us through some of these references here and how this is being understood with respect to the resurrection?
Yeah. So I'll start this off with a if we were to think of the Savior's post-mortal ministry as Latter-day Saints, what's the first text we'll think of?
Oh, well, I mean, uh, I'm going to point to Third Nephi immediately. This is what comes to my mind.
Right. Okay, let me clarify his ministry to the spirit world, I should say.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
That
So,
was a bad question on my part.
yeah,
I'm
no, no, no,
sorry.
no. You're good.
Uh,
So I would immediately go to section 138 of the Doctrine and Covenants,
yeah.
and then probably maybe reference First Peter 4 and 5 or so, or 3 and
Yeah.
4.
No, that precisely like for Latter-day Saints, we think of that, and those are the precise things that come to our mind, especially section 138. If you were to ask an early Christian about that, they would also point to First Peter, and then they would also point to another text that it goes by two names, either the Gospel of Nicodemus or the Acts of Pilate. This is a really fun text as well, because it describes Jesus's ministry to the spirit world from this ancient Christian perspective based on those references in Peter. Um, and you do get this fun interaction. You have a personified death argues for a bit with Satan because Satan is just so happy. He's like, finally, I got him. Jesus is going down, and death is over here like, I hate to break the news to you, but just a few days ago, I had this guy so secure in my grasp, this guy named Lazarus. He wasn't going anywhere, but Jesus is the one who somehow broke him out of my clutches, and you're telling me that you're bringing Jesus here, you know? And
Yeah,
this
that's
is
not the
something
win
that,
you think it is, dude.
yeah, it's like have you thought this through? You get this really comedic interaction. It's something that actually plays out in quite a bit. Alan Hansen pointed out to me it shows up in a Ukrainian passion play as late as I think it was the 1700s, where death is just freaking out that Jesus is coming, and Satan is oblivious. He thinks like, finally, I did it. I've won. You know, yippee, and it doesn't go quite the way that Satan thought it would. Because, and
Yeah,
according to the Gospel of Nicodemus, um, Jesus does come and he descends in glory to Sheol. He bursts the gates of hell and he freed all the captive spirits from Satan in this personified death. And it describes the resurrection of these saints who are in Sheol. It says, "The King of glory stretched out his right hand and took hold of our forefather Adam and raised him up. Then he turned also to the rest and said, 'Come with me, all you who have suffered death through the tree which this man touched. For behold, I raise you all up through the tree of the cross.' Thus he went into paradise, holding our forefather Adam by the hand. He handed him over and all the righteous to Michael the archangel." Now, I am a big fan of early Christian art as well. You know, and this is something that I pointed out in my presentation, is this scene of Jesus breaking down the gates of hell, and taking Adam and Eve by the hand to lift them up out of their graves, is something that we find throughout Byzantine art, especially. Uh, and the a lot of if you go to a lot of these Byzantine chapels, you'll see this same depiction. They're called Anastasis depictions, or Hey Anastasis. It's like the Greek word for resurrection, which literally means to stand or to rise. Um, so for them, this event is deeply connected with the resurrection itself. But these depictions, almost all universally have Jesus. He's standing triumphantly on the broken gates of hell. Satan is bound beneath them. He can't touch you anymore. And on either side, he's taking Adam and Eve by the hand, who are standing up out of their coffins, and they're all being ascending together, and all of the other Old Testament prophets are behind them as well. So, this is something that early Christians, when they thought of the resurrection, they thought this is, Jesus will come, he'll take the dead by the hand and bring them up to glory and into paradise, into the presence of God the Father. You know, um, and I really recommend you guys, look up a lot of that early Christian art. It is something that is absolutely beautiful. Um,
Yeah, I agreed.
and there's this other text called the Gospel of Peter, which is really fun in its own right. But it connects this hand clasp not only to Jesus resurrecting the saints, but to the resurrection of Jesus himself. This is a story that's told with a lot of embellishment, um, and symbolism, but it describes the resurrection through the viewpoint of the centurions who are standing by. And it says, according to this text, um, the centurions saw angels roll the stone away from the tomb. Then they saw again three men come out from the sepulchre, and two of them sustaining the other, leading him out of the tomb by the hand. So you have the two angels who had gone into the tomb come out holding Jesus by the hand as he's resurrected. And that's another fun text, because it'll go on to say that there is a voice from heaven saying, "Have you preached to those who have slept?" And the response, "Yes, I have." Which goes back to the Gospel of Nicodemus and First Peter. This is the Gospel of Peter itself. Um, so it's a very fun, fascinating text in its own ways. There's one more early Christian text that seems to imply that this is happening as well. It's known as Fifth Ezra. If you pick up a Bible with the Apocrypha, you'll find this is in Two Esdras as well. Two Esdras is a composite work of Fifth Ezra, Fourth Ezra, and I believe Sixth Ezra as well. Um, it doesn't explicitly connect the resurrection to a hand clasp itself. However, it does connect the resurrection to a ritual action, where the Lord tells Ezra, "When I find your dead, I will raise them. I will watch for signs, and I will give your dead the place of honor in my resurrection." So we don't know what signs the author of 5 Ezra may have had in mind, but just based on the repeated emphasis throughout all of these texts in the Jewish and Christian milieu, um, of a hand clasp or embrace, I think it is possible that the same ritual handclasp may have been had in mind. Um, and if we were to connect the two, it would also match Joseph Smith's teachings, identifying the handclasp as one of the many signs which cannot be revealed to the elders till the temple is completed, you know. And, you know, throughout all of that, um, if we'll just, turn again to um, yes, one final point that I mentioned. Joseph Smith said, "The place where a man has been buried has been sacred to me." Throughout the early Mediterranean world as a whole, there was this connection between tombs and temples itself as well. If you look at a lot of the early Greek funerary stelas, a lot of them are depicting a temple, or it was a naiskos. I include one in my paper in my presentation that I especially like. It depicts three people in them. There's Procles, Proclides, and Archippe. It's from the 4th century BC. Um, and in this monument, Procles is standing. He's greeting his seated father who's dead, Proclides, um, and they're doing so by taking each other by the hand. And Archippe, the mother of Procles, is standing behind them. And this is all framed in a naiskos, or a temple. So, in for a lot of these people in the ancient world, a hand clasp and the resurrection and tombs and temples were all very closely connected. And so, you know, um, if we just, I guess, unless you have any other thoughts, we just go back to Joseph Smith again. Uh,
Well, I think with respect to um, these funerary sites and their use of temple imagery and even being associated with temples and so forth, I think the general idea that comes across and that is replete through the ancient world is temples are these places of covenant and creation, almost explicitly by definition. But they're also, because of that, they are the meeting place of heaven and earth. They are the place where the divine and the human interact. And so I see this as kind of a uh, this is almost maybe one of the most sacred ways that people depicted their longing for their deceased loved ones and their ancestors and reaching to them on the other side, so to speak, is through these funerary sites and their use of temple imagery, um, because the temple is the place where the divine and the earthly meet, and so um, it makes sense to me that they would use that imagery to denote the passing of their loved ones and the resting place of their bodies as a sort of temple in and of itself where they can go and in some sense commune with the divine, and with their ancestors and so forth.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can see this longing and this expectation that they're going to be reunited, and this is a very sacred image that we have, is this embrace between, as Joseph Smith said, oh my, my father and my son, my brother and my sister, my mother and my daughter, you know, uh, it's something that they fully anticipated, like this beautiful reunion to take place as we embrace each other uh, in the resurrection. Uh, so
Yeah.
yeah, no, thank you for that. Uh, but I mean, just for me to conclude, um, if we turned again to Joseph Smith's vision of the resurrection of the dead, where the dead would take each other by the hand, um, we we know that one, the dead would take each other by the hand before or while getting up. Two, embrace their family members and be embraced by them. And three, be raised up as gods. We can see that each of these themes is found in antiquity throughout the Bible, other Near Eastern and Mediterranean religious traditions, etc. And I would just say that based off of all of this, when Joseph Smith says, so plain was the vision to me, he's very serious and he is acting as a prophet of God. This is something that, without even knowing about it, he's delving into all of this tradition and this imagery that Christians and Jews have built up for centuries, you know, and that they knew and recognized would be something that would happen at the resurrection. And without even realizing it, Joseph Smith, as a prophet of God, is accessing all of that and saying, this is what's going to happen. Um, and I think this is an especially significant manifestation of his prophetic capabilities and his ability to restore to the modern world the ordinances and teachings of the gospel that have been lost or obscured through the ages, through the apostasy, you know, um, especially in the ability or the idea that this hand clasp could reunite in some capacity the dead family members with their sons and their daughters and their fathers and their mothers. Um, and all of this, I think, can only be contextualized within the Holy Temple, the ordinances that Joseph Smith restored. And I would just say, in the resurrection, the teachings that we receive in the temple will finally be used in their fullness, allowing God's children to literally do what we had only done through ritual before, as we're reunited at long last with our heavenly and earthly families. And at that time, I know that I myself would join Joseph in asking, where's my father, my son, my mother and my daughter, my brother and my sister? And I would take comfort knowing that they are by my side as I embrace them and they me. And uh, I think that's just a glorious truth of the gospel that we have.
Yeah. Amen. I appreciate that. Um, Joseph and his successors are, I think, intimately aware of the need to instruct the saints and prepare them. And I think it seems to be clear to me from Joseph's writings and his words that he was doing his darndest to prepare them ritually to receive the keys and principles related to the fulfillment of these signs and so forth, and the resurrection, the embrace of our loved ones, and the embrace of the Lord Himself as He pulls us through the veil, and we're uh, received into His presence is of utmost importance in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And all these things that we read about, that we learn about, that we experience in our own temple, uh, um, in our own temple ritual today, is meant to prepare us for all those grand things. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm really happy for um, the work that you did. This paper is phenomenal. I can't wait till it actually comes out officially and people can read it. Um, in the meantime, I will make sure I point people in the direction of your presentation that you gave at the Interpreter Foundation last year, as well as the article recently published by Scripture Central. And I want to make sure that I give you, Spencer, a moment here as we close out to let the people know where they can find you if they have questions, if they have further inquiry of discussion, and what are some of the things that you're currently working on right now that you're really excited about?
Yeah, no, I love I'd love to hear from anyone who has more questions or want to get involved, speak with me. I do have, so I work at the Ancient America Foundation. I think we talked about that before. If you find me on Facebook, feel free to send me a message. I may not see it immediately, but I think that'll just be a quick, easy way for people to get in contact with me. So if I don't respond, feel free to bug me a little bit. Um, but as far as things that I'm working on right now, I am working on uh, some really cool stuff. I'd mentioned before how um, I believe I mentioned that I'm going to be publishing a commentary on First through Third John with Lincoln Blumel and the BYU New Testament commentary. That's still a few years out, but it is something we are working on. And in closer, to what we have, um, I'll have another paper published soon. Uh, in addition to this, that I presented at the 2025 Fair Virtual Conference on the Old Testament. That was on Malachi 4 and Doctrine and Covenants section 2, and how, I would argue that it's Moroni's commentary on Malachi 4, but based off of how early Jewish and Christian commentators viewed Malachi 4, we can gain a lot of insights to that as well, into how this is fulfilled. And I am writing a paper with Neil Rapley that we will be presenting at uh, a conference in May held by the Interpreter Foundation on the small plates of Nephi. So that is something to keep in mind uh, for your audience. Keep watch for that May conference. There will be a lot of really good presentations there.
Awesome. Thank you, Spencer. I appreciate that. Um, you're working on kind of wide variety of things.
Yes.
Um,
I
is there anything in particular? Is there a particular field uh, that you tend to lean towards um, more than the other? You're working with Blumel, obviously, on some really
Yeah.
cool stuff. And I don't remember, is it uh, um, there was an article recently posted, I can't remember by which publication, about Blumel and the work he's done with the elect lady and
Yes.
so forth. I don't know
Uh,
if you wanted to share anything about that.
Oh, I would love to share about that. So I was his research assistant when I was at BYU, his TA. And as we were working, we were making our translation for this commentary. And we go through, we translated the epistles of John, and we start working on this stuff for the commentary. And uh, in 2 John, you might recall it starts out the elder to the elect lady. Start getting into that, and Lincoln finds this reference from Clement of Alexandria that says that 2 John was written by the elder to a certain Babylonian woman by name Electa, which is the uh, Latin form of the Greek name eclecte. And he says, well, I wonder where Clement is getting this from. And I remember walking into his office one day to work with him, and he'd been mulling this over for quite a while, but one day he says, I think I figured it out, like this, and if you look at the Greek, it's ho presbyteros eklekte kuria. It is an unattested opening address for any uh, papyrological letter. However, uh, due to haplography, there is a definite article that would have been dropped. So it should read ho presbyteros, the elder, eklekte te kuria, which would be to eklekte the lady. But because the te is repeated in her name and the definite article, a scribe would have dropped it out. And we see this throughout all of these papyri, these letters. This is one of the most common mistakes is the definite article before a modifier would be dropped out. And so essentially, not only do he recently published his book through Fortress Press, called Lady Eclecte, Rediscovering the Lost Woman of the New Testament, in which he goes through this and argues that based off of papyrology and letters that we have, based off of manuscript evidence for New Testament manuscripts that we have, and a variety of factors, it should actually read into John the elder to the Lady Eclecte. And so we have, this woman's name in the New Testament here. And so I was really grateful. It was an honor to, be a part of, um, help, in whatever way that I could in helping that happen. Lincoln Blumel is a genius, if I say so myself. And I highly recommend everyone to read this book of his. Uh, it's actually sitting there on my shelf. You might be able to see it if you zoom in enough. But it is something that is phenomenal. It is a seismic shift, he calls it. And one thing he does also point out is if we lived in an alternate universe where there were only 26 books in the New Testament and someone dug in the sands of Egypt and found this epistle that started out Ho Presbyteros Eclecte Curia, without a doubt, they would restore it as Eclecte Te Curia because it just fits how letters were written in the first through third centuries. It Eclecte is a well-attested name. It's one that is more attested than some of the other women's names in the Bible in the New Testament. So we know that Eclecte is a name. We know how letters were started, and this even would match how Third John starts in its epistle or epistolary address. So it helps support that 2 and 3 John are written by the same person because they start the letters the same, just as that was a common tendency for writers. There was one instance where they were able to restore almost 4 lines of text because it's a guy writing an epistle to his mother, and he always started out his epistles the same way. So we know that this is just how people, acted, how they uh, wrote, and he presents very clear, solid evidence throughout this book for this restoration of, Eclecte Te Curia, the Lady Eclecte. So, anyways, that's probably more than what you needed, but it is a phenomenal discovery. So it will be a part of our commentary with a discussion on how Joseph Smith used that as well in restoring the Relief Society. So just something to look out for.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I appreciate you plugging that as well. I look forward to picking that up and reading his book and getting into that. As someone who is so unfamiliar with the Greek and all that discussion, it will be quite new for me in some regards. But I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a lot of fun. Um, and Spencer, I appreciate you spending time with me this afternoon, talking about your paper and the work that you've been doing. I look forward to seeing your presentation that you're working on with Neil on the small plates of Nephi. That sounds really fun. So I look forward to that as well. Um, and with that, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all those who stuck with us and who also are nerds like us and really love talking about the gospel. And so for all those listening, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.